The Last Dance of Surya. The air in my Phnom Penh apartment is a physical thing. You can feel its weight, thick with humidity, and the memory of 100 monsoons soaked into the plaster walls. On nights like this, the only thing that moves is the tired, brown blade of the single ceiling fan, groaning with each rotation as if it's complaining about the effort. It chops the heavy air, stirring the dust motes dancing in the beam of my 16-film projector. My name is Rithi, and I am, or rather was, a student of history. Not the grand history of kings and wars, but the smaller, more fragile histories. The stories captured on brittle celluloid, forgotten in rusty canisters in the backrooms of university archives. My thesis was on the golden age of Cambodian cinema and performance arts, that brief, brilliant flash of creativity in the 50s and 60s, before the world turned dark. The projector, a heavy metal beast I'd borrowed from the university, whirred and clicked in the corner, its rhythmic pulse the only heartbeat in the room besides my own. On the wall, a ghost was dancing. The footage was grainy, flickering with the passage of 70 years. It showed a lone Apsara dancer on a simple wooden stage, illuminated by a single, harsh spotlight. Her movements were liquid grace, a language spoken by the delicate curl of her fingers and the precise, measured turn of her head. Every gesture was a word, every pose a sentence in a story I was desperate to understand. She was an echo from a world my grandparents knew, a world before the killing fields swallowed a generation of artists, poets, and dancers just like her. I leaned forward, trying to ignore the sticky feeling of my shirt clinging to my back. My world was the smell of dust and old film stock, the low hum of the projector, and the silent, hypnotic dance on my wall. It was my sanctuary. Then another smell crept into the room. It started faintly, a whisper on the edge of my senses. I thought it was just the night-blooming jasmine from the courtyard below, its scent carried on the humid breeze. But it grew stronger, more insistent. This wasn't the fresh, sweet fragrance of a living flower. This was heavy, cloying, almost suffocating. It was the scent of jasmine used in funeral rites, thick as incense smoke, a smell that clung to the back of your throat and filled your lungs with the perfume of decay. The air, already thick, became unbreathable. The fan seemed to struggle, its groans growing louder as it churned the oppressive fragrance around the small room. I felt a sudden, primal chill, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead despite the suffocating heat. My eyes watered from the intensity of the scent. And that's when I saw it. My gaze drifted from the dancer on the wall to the source of the light, to the projector itself. My own reflection was there, a faint ghost in the convex glass of the large projection lens, but I wasn't alone. Superimposed over my own wide-eyed face was hers. The Apsara dancer from the film. Her features were perfectly clear, painted in the reflection as if she were standing right behind me. Her skin was pale under the traditional white makeup, her lips a slash of crimson, and her eyes, lined with black coal, stared directly out of the lens. But her smile on the film, it was a serene, ethereal curve. In the reflection, it was stretched impossibly wide, a grotesque parody of her divine expression, a silent, painted scream. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I was frozen, pinned by that horrific, smiling gaze. The projector continued to whir, the film continued to roll. On the wall, the dancer's graceful performance continued, unbroken, her back to the audience in a slow, elegant turn. But in the glass of the lens, the reflection of her head, the one layered over mine, began to turn. Slowly, deliberately. It moved independently of the film, her painted, grinning face rotating with a nauseating smoothness until her kohl-rimmed eyes were looking right at me. The film on the wall showed the back of her head. The reflection in the lens showed her staring into my soul. And the room, my small, safe room, was filled with the deafening silence of my own terror and the choking, sweet smell of jasmine. I scrambled backwards, my chair scraping violently against the tiled floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the stillness. I fell, knocking over a stack of books and landing hard. My eyes never left the projector. Her reflection was gone. There was only my own terrified face staring back at me from the lens. On the wall, the film loop ended. The dancer froze in her final, graceful pose, and then the screen went white, filled with the flickering static of the film's tail end. The projector clicked off automatically. Silence. The only sound was the groan of the fan and my own ragged, panicked breathing. The smell of jasmine was fading, slowly being replaced by the familiar scent of dust and old paper. I lay on the floor for a long time, my body trembling, my mind refusing to process what I had just seen. A trick of the light. A hallucination brought on by heat exhaustion and staring at flickering images for too long. It had to be. I told myself that all night. I repeated it like a mantra as I packed the projector and the film canister away, my hands shaking so badly I could barely secure the latches. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that unnaturally wide smile, those eyes that moved on their own. In the morning, the harsh Phnom Penh sunlight did little to burn away the memory. The world outside my window was alive with the usual morning chaos, the roar of motos, the calls of street vendors, the distant clang of construction. It was all so normal, so real. It made my experience feel like a fever dream. I needed to know more about that film. It wasn't just academic curiosity anymore. It was a compulsion. The canister was simply labeled Apsara Study, circa 1960. No dancer's name, no director, no studio. It was an anonymous piece of history, a ghost without a name. My first stop was the university archives, a place that smelled even more strongly of decaying paper and forgotten things than my apartment. The head archivist, a kind, elderly woman named Apsara, listened patiently to my story, though I left out the part about the reflection. I just told her I was captivated by the dancer and wanted to identify her for my thesis. She adjusted her glasses and peered at the canister I'd brought back. "Ah, this one," she said, her voice a soft, papery rustle. "This is from the Van collection. A French anthropologist, Etienne Van, donated his work to us years ago. He was fascinated by the classical dance forms before the war." She led me to a dusty corner of the archives, to a series of filing cabinets that looked as old as the building itself. After a few minutes of searching, she pulled out a thin, brittle file. Inside were notes, written in elegant, sloping French, and photographs. My breath caught in my throat. There she was. In a series of black and white stills, she posed in the same costume, her expression serene and professional. But one photo was different. It was a candid shot. She was sitting on the edge of the stage, her headdress off, and she was laughing. It was a genuine, beautiful laugh. For a moment, the grotesque smiling mask from the projector lens was replaced by this image of a vibrant, living young woman. Her name was Soria. According to Van's notes, she was a prodigy, a rising star in the Royal Ballet. He wrote glowingly of her talent, calling her the future of the dance. But his notes ended abruptly in 1962. The last entry simply read, "Soria's final performance was tonight. Unspeakable tragedy. The stage is dark." An unspeakable tragedy. The words sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. "Apsara," I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What happened to her?" The archivist sighed, a sad, heavy sound. "I do not know for sure, Bong Rithi. The records from that time are incomplete. Many things were lost, but the story I heard from my elders, it is a dark one. They say she was not just a dancer. They say she became a vessel." "A vessel for what?" She looked around the empty archive as if afraid of being overheard. "For something old, something that should have been left alone. There was a special performance, a ritual to appease the spirits of the land. They used ancient masks, ancient garments. They say the one Soria wore, it was not just a costume, it was a home, and the spirit inside had been waiting a long time for a body so skilled, so perfect for the dance." A chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the archive's air conditioning. What happened in her final performance? No one knows exactly, she said, lowering her voice further. The accounts are fragmented. Some say she danced with a power no human could possess, that the music became strange, discordant, that the air grew cold and smelled of funeral flowers. They say her movements became wrong, her limbs bending at impossible angles. The audience fled in terror. When the stage managers finally went back, the stage was empty. Saurya was gone. They found only the mask and costume lying in a heap on the floor. She was never seen again. The story was so close, so horrifyingly similar to my own experience. The strange music, the cold air, the smell of funeral flowers. I left the archives feeling more terrified than when I had arrived. This wasn't just a ghost. This was something more complex, more ancient. I had not just watched a film, I had opened a door. And the cloying scent of jasmine that I thought I'd left in my apartment now seemed to follow me, a faint, ghostly perfume clinging to my clothes. I knew, with a certainty that settled like a stone in my gut, that this was far from over. That night, I couldn't bring myself to stay in my apartment. I went to a small, open-air restaurant by the riverside, hoping the noise and the crowds would chase the fear away. I sat nursing a beer, watching the tourist boats drift by, their lights twinkling on the dark, churning water of the tunnel sap. But there was no escape. Every reflective surface became a source of anxiety. The polished surface of the table, the screen of my phone, even the dark water of the river. I kept catching flickers of movement at the edge of my vision, a flash of a golden headdress, the curve of a crimson smile. I knew it was just my mind playing tricks on me, my paranoia feeding itself. But the feeling of being watched was relentless. I started hearing things. Faintly, underneath the city's hum, I could hear the delicate, tinny music of a pinpeat ensemble, the traditional orchestra that accompanies classical dance. It was so quiet I could almost convince myself it was coming from a distant radio or a passing car. But the melody was always the same. It was the music from the film. When I finally forced myself to go home, the apartment felt different. The air was still and cold, the oppressive humidity gone. It felt like a room that had been waiting for me. I walked in, my heart pounding, and flicked on the light. Everything was as I had left it. The projector and the film canister were still packed away in the corner. But the smell was there, faint but undeniable, the sweet, cloying scent of jasmine. I decided I had to get rid of the film. It was the source, the anchor for whatever this was. My first thought was to simply destroy it, to burn it. But the archivist's story about the spirit being tied to objects, about a sacred costume being a vessel, made me hesitate. What if destroying the film didn't banish the spirit but unleashed it, freed it from its celluloid prison? My grandmother always said you must show respect to spirits. You don't fight them. You appease them, or you guide them on their way. There was only one person I could think of who might know what to do, Lokta Chan. He was an old projectionist who had worked at the grand cinemas of Phnom Penh during the Golden Age. He was a living piece of that history. Now, he lived in a small, cluttered house on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by towering stacks of film reels and rusting cinematic equipment. Finding him was like stepping back in time. His house smelled of ozone and aging plastic. Lokta Chan himself was a tiny, frail man with eyes that were cloudy with age but still held a sharp intelligence. I explained my situation, starting with my thesis and then, hesitantly, telling him the whole story. The reflection, the jasmine, the music. I showed him the canister. He took it from me, his gnarled fingers tracing the label. He didn't look at me with disbelief. He just nodded slowly, a deep sadness in his eyes. "Saurya," he whispered, the name like a fragile prayer. "I remember her. I was a boy, an apprentice when she danced, a light Bong Rithi. She was a light that shone so brightly." He looked at me, his gaze piercing. "You did not just find a film, you found her echo, and it has latched onto you. These old films, they are not just images. They are captured moments of life, of soul. And her soul, it was in turmoil when it was captured. It is trapped in the dance." "What can I do?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Lokta, I am so scared." "You cannot destroy it," he said, confirming my deepest fear. "That would be an act of violence. It would be like shattering a tombstone. Her anger would have no focus, no vessel. It would cling to the last person who held it. It would cling to you forever." He explained that Soria was not a malicious spirit, not a Kraham seeking to cause harm. She was a performer without a stage, a story without an ending. Her tragedy had corrupted her art, turning it into a repeating, desperate cycle. She was dancing her last, horrific performance over and over, and now she had found a new audience. "She needs to finish the dance," Lokta-chan said, his voice low and serious. "The ritual she was performing, it was never completed. It was interrupted by terror. Her spirit cannot rest until the final note is played, the final gesture is made." He gave me a set of strange, terrifying instructions. He told me I had to project the film one last time, but I was not to watch it as a student, as an observer. I was to be her audience, her only audience. I had to sit through the entire performance from beginning to end without looking away. No matter what I saw, no matter what I heard or smelled. "You must bear witness," he said, his hand gripping my arm with surprising strength. "You must give her the respect of an audience. You must watch until the very end. It is the only way to release her, to show her the way out of the loop." He also gave me a small, woven pouch of salt and dried herbs. "Keep this in your pocket. It will not protect you, not really, but it will remind your soul that it belongs to the world of the living, not the world of shadows." That night, I returned to my apartment with a sense of dread so profound it felt like a physical illness. The city's noises faded into a dull roar in my ears. The world outside my door ceased to exist. There was only the room, the projector, and the canister that felt as heavy as a coffin. My hands trembled as I set up the projector again. The familiar whir and click started, a sound that was once comforting but now sounded like the ticking of a clock counting down my final moments. I took a deep breath, clutching the small pouch Lokta-chan had given me in my pocket. The rough texture of the cloth and the sharp scent of the herbs were a small, solid anchor in a sea of fear. The white leader flickered on the wall, and then she appeared. The dance began. The initial movements were just as I remembered them, full of grace and beauty. The tinny music from the film's audio track filled the room. I sat on a small stool in the center of the floor, my eyes fixed on the wall, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Then the air began to change. The cloying, suffocating scent of jasmine flooded the room, stronger than ever before. It was so thick I felt like I was drowning in it. A deep, unnatural cold seeped out from the walls, raising goosebumps on my arms and turning my breath to mist. The gentle music from the projector began to warp. The melody twisted, notes souring and stretching into a discordant, agonizing drone that vibrated in my bones. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get out, but I remembered Lokta-chan's words, "Do not look away. You must bear witness." I forced my eyes to stay on the dancing figure on the wall. Her movements were changing. The sublime grace was gone, replaced by something frantic, something broken. Her limbs began to move in ways that were not humanly possible, her joints seeming to dislocate and snap back into place. Her beautiful, serene dance had become a horrifying contortion. The whir of the projector was no longer the only sound. I heard a soft, rhythmic tapping. I risked a glance away from the wall, down at the floor. My blood ran cold. From the base of the wall where the image was projected, a dark, viscous liquid was seeping out, pooling on the tiles. It wasn't water. It was thick and black like old blood. And from the edges of the pool, pale, slender fingers were emerging, the nails long and stained. They were tapping on the floor, keeping a silent, gruesome rhythm with the dancer's broken movements. I snapped my head back to the screen, my breath catching in a choked sob. I could feel a presence in the room now. It wasn't just on the film, it was with me. The cold was no longer just in the air, it was a focused spot right behind my back. I could feel the icy breath of it on my neck. On the wall, the image of the dancer flickered violently. Her face, which had been in serene profile, turned to the camera, but it wasn't the face from the film. The makeup was cracked and peeling. One of her kohl-rimmed eyes was a gaping black socket, and her smile, that impossibly wide, terrifying smile, was back, a rictus of agony and rage. She was staring directly at me, through the screen, through time itself. The walls of my apartment began to feel thin like paper. The image on the wall was no longer a projection, it was a window. I could see the dusty wooden stage behind her, the dark, empty theater. The world of the film was bleeding into mine. She raised a hand, her fingers curling into a gesture that was not part of any classical dance I had ever studied. It was a gesture of beckoning, an invitation. A low, guttural whisper slithered through the room, seeming to come from all directions at once. It wasn't Khmer. It was some older, darker tongue. It was the voice of the thing that had taken her, the ancient spirit from the mask, and it was speaking to me. I shut my eyes tight, tears streaming down my face. I couldn't do it. It was too much. But Lokta Chan's voice echoed in my head until the very end. With a shuddering gasp, I forced my eyes open. I looked at the horrifying figure on the wall, the broken dancer, the vessel. I met her single, hate-filled eye, and I did the only thing I could think of. I brought my hands together in a traditional sampi, the gesture of respect. I bowed my head to her. I was no longer a student, no longer a victim. I was her audience. I would give her my witness. I watched her horrifying, broken dance to its conclusion. I watched as her limbs twisted, as the black liquid spread across my floor, as the whispering grew to a roar. I watched until the final, discordant note faded, and she froze in a monstrous parody of a final pose. The film flickered and died. The projector clicked off. And the presence was gone. The cold vanished, replaced instantly by the oppressive, familiar humidity. The smell of jasmine evaporated, leaving only the scent of my own fearful sweat. I looked down. The black pool, the tapping fingers, they were gone too. The floor was clean and dry. I sat there in the dark, trembling for an hour, maybe more. I was alive. I had survived. The next day, I took the film canister, sealed it in a box, and drove for hours to a remote, quiet pagoda in the countryside that Lokta Chan had told me about. I gave it to the head monk, along with a donation, explaining only that it held a restless story and needed a peaceful place to be kept. He simply nodded, his eyes full of a deep, sorrowful understanding, and took the box from me. I never went back to my thesis. I changed my major. I couldn't look at old films anymore. I tried to forget. For months, life was normal. The fear faded to a dark memory, a story I would never tell anyone. I moved to a new apartment, a modern, sterile place with no history soaked into its walls. I thought it was over. I truly believed I was free. Until last night. I was working late on a paper, sitting in front of my laptop. I finished a paragraph and leaned back, the screen of my computer going dark for a moment before the screensaver came on. And in that brief, black, reflective moment, I saw her. It was just for a second, a flicker. Her face superimposed over my own tired reflection in the dark screen. Her painted lips were stretched into that same, impossibly wide smile. She was there, not in the film, not in the apartment, inside the screen, inside my screen. The film is in a pagoda hundreds of kilometers away. The projector is collecting dust back at the university, but she's still here. Lokta Chan was wrong. I didn't release her. When I sat as her audience, I didn't just bear witness. I became the new stage. The echo isn't trapped in the celluloid anymore. It's latched onto me. So a word of warning, be careful of the stories you unearth. Be careful of the ghosts you find in forgotten archives and dusty reels of film. Some stories don't want to be told. They want to be experienced. And some dancers, they never ever want the performance to end. They just need a new audience and a new stage. And these days, there are so many reflective screens to dance in, just like the one you're looking at right now.